What's up, YouTube? Today we're going to be looking at extension methods, and as you can tell from the title of this video, I'm saying don't use extension methods. That's exactly how I feel about extension methods. So you must wonder, like, why? And why would this language feature exist if it's such a bad thing? Before I answer those two questions, I'd like to just tell you something else about extension methods, or namely there's a book called the Framework Design Guidelines. This book was written by the .NET team. They wrote this book about, I think, either 8 or 10 years after, actually it was 10 years, but 8 years after it was publicly available, .NET was publicly available. So 10 years of their experience through building out the .NET framework and the C# libraries, they came up with a bunch of guidelines. In this book, they have a guideline of the book. The way it's written it's very interesting. So they make a statement about something, do something or don't do something. And then they invite a bunch of people from within Microsoft to comment on that guideline. And as you can tell, not everyone agrees with all the guidelines. Some will agree partially, some will agree wholeheartedly, and some will just completely disagree with these guidelines. And I feel I do the same with a lot of these guidelines. There's many guidelines I think are good guidelines, and there's many that I think are invalid. So I'll tell you what they tell you about the guidelines for extension methods. They say, if the class is not yours, don't extend it. And then the next sentence, if the class is yours, don't extend it. So net, don't use extension methods. Now, why would they say that? And why is there such a feature in the language? And I'm not agreeing with them because they're saying that. I just have had my own experiences. And I should tell you, there will be a bunch of videos of this nature where there's mainly discussion, maybe some code to show a certain example or to kind of make a point. But mainly I'm just wanting to talk here. So it's more like a vent or a rant. But I honestly wouldn't be saying something if I didn't feel that others should hear this and either make up their own minds or just follow along either ways. So I had, obviously, as you can tell, a few experiences with regards to extension methods, which is why I have an opinion, and it so happens that it agrees with the .NET Framework Design Guidelines. So what is this opinion and why? So why does it exist in this language, first of all? Well, it's very simple. Link. Link was released, I think, in like C# 3.5, I'm not sure, but around that frame, 2007, 2008 time frame, I think. And Link depends on extension methods. If it weren't for extension methods, we'd have a weird... So Link, the feature functionality of Link is independent of the extension method. It's the usage of Link. So when we can have a collection and we can say .where or .select or .order by or whatever the dot features are, that is being made available through extension methods. So if it weren't for the fact that the language supported extension methods, then the usage of Link would be without extension methods, which would not have been as succinct or as clear as we have it today. So extension methods were introduced into the language, and Link is a library functionality. It's not part of the framework. It's not part of the .NET framework, if you will. It's a library. And Link made use of extension methods to simplify the syntax in the way we use Link. And I love that syntax, because I think if it weren't for the syntax, it would be quite cumbersome. But that's why it exists. And effectively what they're saying is, we had to do this for Link, but don't use it for your own things. Now, of course, you can tell there's a distinction between the .NET framework team and other teams within sort of the umbrella of .NET, such as ASP.NET and Web API and a bunch of other teams like that. Those teams don't necessarily follow these guidelines either, and that's unfortunate. So what are my issues with extension methods? Well, the number one problem I have is discoverability. In other words, the non or indiscoverability. And I'll explain what that means. So imagine if you started a new project and you had an array or some collection, enumerable, and you said dot and you didn't see the where and the select. What would happen? Imagine you're discovering or attempting to use link for the first time and you don't see these methods, then you wouldn't use it. Well, what they did is every new project has the system.link namespace pre-included in the using clauses. So you discover it. And as a result, link sort of works. Now, I have issues with link as well. I'll talk about that in a different video. But if it weren't for the fact that the system.link namespace was pre-included in a new project, you wouldn't discover it. Because when you said dot on some object, an enumerable, an object that implements the enumerable interface, you wouldn't see it. So link works because of the fact, or it is discoverable because of the fact that the namespace is already in there. So now, if you were to create extension methods for your own objects or for let's say .NET classes, right? Nobody's going to find it. Now you know it because you created it, so it's there, and you might advertise that across a bunch of people in your team. But what happens when a new member comes on the team? They're not going to find it. Right? I hope that makes sense. If you don't know what extension methods are, then obviously this talk may not make a whole lot of sense. Well, if you don't know extension methods, don't bother knowing them. Now, I'm making light of the situation, but I wouldn't be telling you this if I didn't actually follow these guidelines myself. Right? So, or this guidance, what I'm talking about here. And what happens, let's say there's two other scenarios. You have a whole bunch of extension methods on the project you're working on. And they're across the board, different objects, different extensions, and so on and so forth. Everything that works perfectly fine for you on your project. Right? And then you go on to a completely different team, or you've got a new job and you're in a different company, and you don't have those extension methods. Now you're lost. And the flip side of that, right? You have never used extension methods. You've certainly not extended the .NET classes. And now you go to another team or another company, another job, and they have extended the crap out of every single .NET class. And you're seeing methods on things that you've never seen before. Like, where did this come from? Is this a new version of C#? Like, what does it even do? What I'm trying to get at is this. Each of us has a certain amount of experience with C# and .NET. And in order for you to be effective at your job, you should know at least the basic stuff in .NET, right? And it turns out that with extension methods, you are actually lost. And I've had this experience in a few projects, and I know how that feels. I have a decent amount of C# experience, but when I went on this team, it was like, I don't know what the heck is going on. I'm seeing methods I've never seen before. I don't know what they mean, and they're named similarly to what is already there. Like, instead of a to list, it was an as list, and I'm thinking, okay. Like, initially, when I saw the as list, I just didn't think it was like a different thing, because you're not used to seeing it. And then I realized, oh, this is an as list. Like, what the heck is that? What's the difference between an as list and a to list? And there's subtle differences, and that's adding to the confusion, right? So you want to be. Now, you can wait till you experience this, and you can probably ignore it if you've experienced it, but I am not I mean, I don't have the time for this nonsense. Okay, there's many other things I can worry about and that I would like to worry about and think about and scratch my head about. But self-inflicted wounds, I'm not interested in. If something is going to cause a certain amount of pain that could have been avoided, I'd rather just avoid it. The cons far outweigh the pros. Of course, there are pros to extension methods, but given the cons that I've experienced, I don't want those cons. I'd rather not have it at all. So on my teams, you're not allowed to use extension methods. Now, a bit of a caveat there, I'll get to that. But let me continue on with this issue, this discoverability or the inability to discover, which is the big problem. And then when you do discover, you haven't a clue what these things do, because especially when you're augmenting .NET classes, which the framework design guideline says very clearly, if the class is not yours, don't extend it. Then even an experienced C# developer is kind of lost, right? Because you don't know what that method is doing. The other experience I've had is in the same project on the same team, there were two extension methods to the same object with the same name. They were implemented just slightly differently. It turns out that functionality was required in two different parts of the system with a slight change. But as a result, we had a bug in our system and it took us a long time to find the bug. We couldn't understand because no one thought to F12 into the method to see why is it behaving differently when it was very simple implementation, but none of us actually knew there were two of them. So if you can have an extension method by the same name on the same class on the same type in different namespaces with different implementations, then effectively by just changing out the using namespace on the top on the using clauses, you can introduce a bug that you don't know about. And it took us a long time to find this as well. So now, of course, in a team, how do you know that somebody's intending to extend this class here in this way and they're going to call it this name, and somebody else wants to do the same thing, but they're going to put it in some other location, therefore it's a different namespace and it's got different implementation. I just don't want these problems. It's not worth it. It's seriously not worth the headache. I mean, there's a syntactic convenience, but that's it. I'm not saying, so when you implement an extension method, you have a static class and a static method that does the extension. I'm not saying don't have that. Have it. I mean, if you need that functionality, you have it. Just don't make it an extension method. That's where the problem starts. I'd rather see the so-and-so static class dot so-and-so static method and pass in that as an argument. The thing you're trying to extend, pass it in as an argument rather than have an extension method. I think that might be even clearer because you can see there's some class that's specialized in doing the functionality that is using this other class and does the job. That's far easier to remember. Oh, there's a class called so-and-so that does that extra work, than saying there's an extension method and I see sometimes and I don't see sometimes. When I don't see it, I don't know what namespace to use. I have to go back and look at the other code to see how did that extension method become available in that CS file, what namespace is this thing in, then come here and use the same namespace. I don't know if you guys have experienced this sort of thing. Now, if you have, you might say, well, yeah, it's a minor problem, right? But the thing is, then this problem becomes worse. That's when you got to kind of put a stop to it. Now, I've used the HttpClient in .NET since they introduced it. And it turns out there's a method on this class that I use a lot. But it's an extension method and I can hardly ever find it. Now, over the years, I've had to memorize the NuGet in which this extension method is available, but it's also the problem that NuGet, this extension method has shifted NuGets, meaning it's gone to a different NuGet over a period of time. This is impossible to track. I mean, you can't keep. Now, I understand why they have that extension method. It's not like I know exactly why they have that as an extension method. In other words, I know that functionality is required. And the fact that it's an extension method, I know why they had to keep it separate. But I still don't like it. understanding why something is there and yet not liking it, I think is fine. I think we make choices of that nature. We frequently make choices on some things that we like and don't like. And this is not a personal preference. And my likes and dislikes are not based on a personal preference. It's based on experiences. And when the experiences are not worth having, I don't want to have them anymore. So I'll show you that thing here. Now, hopefully I'll remember the namespace this thing is in. The thing is, you start a new project and you struggle, you'll trip and fall a bit, but you'll find it, right? And then now that you've included the NuGet in that project, you could be on that project for a couple of years and you have no need to do that anymore, so you forget where it is. Then you start a new project and you're back to square one, right? It's like, again, okay, I knew there's some method there, and how often do you remember the actual name? And I'll tell you why the name is confusing, because there's 10 other names or similarly named methods in this class and slight differences. And it's like, okay, like, is it this or is it that? I'll show you the code here. So I have, let's say I'll use the HTTP client. And this HTTP client has a get async. Now, I don't care for the URL. I'm not going to show this working. I'm just going to show you the functionality itself. Now, this is awaitable. So I'll await that. Okay, once you have this, returns a HTTP response message. And the HTTP response message ensure success. Let's assume I've gone to some website that returns JSON, some objects with JSON, right? And so you're getting a JSON string back, but you want to use like the JSON convert thing to convert that JSON string into a collection, let's say, of some type. So that's what I'm going to try and do here. And let's say I have some type. Okay, I don't care to specify anything for now. So on content, so you see the read as string async and read as stream async and read as byte async. There's a whole bunch of methods, but the one I'm looking for is not here because it's an extension method, and you can see from the little icon, these purple icons here, if they had little arrows on them, then they'd be extension methods. These are not extension methods. And there's an extension method that would be, I think it's called read. See, I get confused now. Read async, I think it's just called read async, and it's a generic type argument. Read async, and let's say it's a collection coming back, so I could actually type it to say I want you to convert the JSON string to a enumerable of, let's say, my object, right? So that's the point. Now, and I've seen this, in the earlier days when I was working with HttpClient for the first time, and I discovered this method through some example from the MSDN. I was stumped every single time I used this class. I knew it was there. I just didn't know what NuGet it is in, or what assembly is in, and what namespace is in, and it's just a nightmare. So now I know here this time that it's on in a NuGet called Web API client, I think. Yes, see, now that helps me there, so I know that it's there. But how would you know that? How would you know this is where it is? So because I know, I now can use it, but now I also remember it after all these years of using it consistently or constantly. I can remember it. read async to read as, read as async. Okay, I guess that's the name. See, this is the whole thing. Because I'm not using the results, so it's just complaining about that. So even though I've used it, I'm sort of struggling, as you can tell. And I'm not doing this on purpose. This is just, do you actually remember names of methods to that detail? When you see the choices, you can pick the right one, but when you have to come up with the name by yourself, it's like, okay, I forget what is it called, read as async or read async. Anyway, so that's a good example of an extension method that causes trouble. And you can memorize things, but the idea of programming is not to memorize stuff. You should fall into the pit of success. You shouldn't have to remember things. Don't step here, you're going to go down a hole there, and don't step there to go down a hole here. That's not what programming is about. So now, do I use extension methods? Yes, I use extension methods. But I hold myself to a very high bar. So if I want to justify to myself or the team I'm on, when something needs to be an extension method, there's a very high bar. And I'll tell you what that bar is. If you meet that bar, I think it can be an extension method. But if you don't meet that bar, it's not. And there's been cases where, the team has said, Shiv, even though this thing meets your bar, we don't want to make it an extension method. I said, okay, cool, then that's fine too. The functionality is still there in that class. That's, the static class that you're using to extend some other class. You're not losing the functionality. I'm not saying don't have the functionality. I'm just saying either you make it an extension method or not. That's the sort of the difference or the catch. So what is my bar to, at least for me personally, to say yes, this can or cannot be an extension method? If you're thinking about an extension method, whatever that functionality is, if the entire C# community could use that feature, it's not about you wanting it personally or on this project is useful or on this team is useful or on this organization is useful. No, it's not about that. Could the entire C# community use that extension method? And are you coupling a bunch of other things into that extension method? Like, for example, I'll give you an example, and this is just a bad idea. Right? Let's say you're extending datetime. Please don't do that. And for whatever reason, you've got some requirement where you want the datetime to be formatted as some sort of a string that says, a minute ago or 2 minutes ago or, 15 minutes ago, right? And you've seen that on websites, right? Somebody posted a message and it was 10 minutes ago. And say, I'm going to extend the datetime, class to do that, or the type to do that. And so now you got a string, read inside of this datetime thing. I'm saying don't do that. You're mixing types. Not that you're actually mixing types because it's not really compiled into that. But when you start to mix types, that's not a good idea because one would never know what all else you pull in. Right? Let's say you got your own, a customer object and you have a feature where you want to extend the date time that also uses the customer object. This is so weird. One would never expect that to be a function on datetime, right? So that's what I mean. When you start coupling other types that are not in any way related to this type, that's something that will not meet the bar. So it only meets the bar if these two criteria are met completely. One, that this extension method could be usable by the entire C# community. It's not about you or your project or your company or whatever it is, right? It's not a personal thing or a small thing. It's a global thing. And two, you're not coupling something else along for the ride. If it meets that, then it could be an extension method. It's not like it has to be an extension method. It could be. You can justify saying, yes, this could be an extension method. Now, by the way, just so before I move on to the other project, I want to just answer. So why is this read as async an extension method? Well, for the same reason. Keep in mind that this read as async, internally, the method is using the JSON, the Newtons of JSON. And they didn't want to couple the HttpClient with Newtons on JSON. So they had to pull it out and make it separate. So it's an extension method for that reason. I don't believe it needed to be an extension method, but it's like a convenience thing. And that's all that extension methods give you is the convenience. There's not some earth-shattering feature or some earth-shattering capability that you're getting that you won't get right? And I get that they're cool. I mean, appreciating something for its coolness or its the technique that's being used or the implementation. I think as software engineers or just engineers generally can appreciate a technical feature or a capability that is just mind-blowing or it's really cool. And I can appreciate extension methods for being cool. I just don't like to see them in my code. I mean, honestly, I don't like to see them. Now, I'll show you one of there's two extension methods that I have. There's a total of, I don't know, count them, but there's like 4 or 5 extension methods I've had in my entire C# programming career, or at least since the extension methods existed, right, in the language. And even those, I sometimes hesitate making them extension methods just because I know that somebody on the team is not going to know it exists. So they'll do it manually, let's say, because they don't know it's there. And then I'm going to say, oh, well, you should use this extension method from here. So it's an education problem, meaning, there's a lot of turnover in software. People come and go in different teams, and it's a constant, and especially when you're hiring, mid to senior programmers, they already know how stuff works. And they don't know there's an extension method for something. So they won't even look there. They won't even bother looking somewhere else. They just start writing the code all by themselves, and then that's different from other places where you're using an extension method. Right? So that's another problem. There's a consistency or the inconsistency of code becomes an issue. Okay, switching on to the examples. Oh, and there's another weirdness with extension methods. Just remember, because the first example I'll show you is going to make use of that feature of extension methods. This may not be obvious, but you can call extension methods on null references. I mean, how cool is that? How cool is that? You can call extension methods on null references. So you would think it wouldn't work, but it does. I mean, it's just magic, right? Of course, once you understand how extension methods are implemented, at compile time, it totally makes sense. But it's like, okay, so there's this object I got. So it's an instance of some class, and I said dot, and I see this method, right? So I'm calling a method. I may not know it's an extension method. I'm calling a method. I'm thinking, man, well, maybe I should check to make sure that object itself is not null before I call this method. You don't have to. So the first one is an example of an extension method. Both examples are examples of extension methods I believe could be extension methods given the criteria that I mentioned earlier. If you use deny disposable, and you're not using the disposable in a using, because that's the other thing with disposables is you don't want nested usings. And frequently, you're working with multiple disposables, and you don't want nested using. So the solution to that is to have one try finally, and then dispose of the classes yourself. So the dispose method is a method. So you can't call dispose on something that's null, right? So you have to check. So you have to say, if it's not null, then dispose. If it's not null, then dispose. And that just clutters your code up. It adds the sort of code complexity. It's adding, from a code coverage standpoint, is one more conditional thing that you have to, a scenario that you have to test for. And just honestly is cluttering up the code. So I have this method. It's an extension method that is called disposable extensions, the class name, and the method is called dispose if not null. And you can see the implementation here. It takes an disposable, and it internally is checking. If it's not disposable, then call dispose. Right? It's a simple implementation. It's not coupling anything else. But let's look at the call side. So on the call side, you would have code like this. Right? These are all disposables. They could all potentially be null. And as a result, I'm just saying dispose if not null, dispose if not null. Now, in the case of the connection, I'm not blindly calling dispose if not null. I'm just saying dispose because it will never be null at this point. So that's the other aspect. I mean, this is part of my programming with intent series where I don't like to call things unnecessarily. Right? So if this is showing me intent. So I can look at code like this and say, yep, and you're trying to tell me that this connection will never be null here at this point. So no need to call dispose if not null. Whereas these two can potentially be null, so you're calling dispose if not null. So you're speaking volumes to me by intentionally calling dispose here and dispose if not null here. But that's besides the point. That's a different topic. But that's the call site, and it cleaned up this code on the call site. And when I'm doing the test, I'm just calling this method and make sure that the dispose actually works. I don't need to test this extension method. Is fairly simple, so it's been excluded from code coverage. I don't know why it's not highlighting the attribute correctly. It should be, I believe my attributes are colored like the same as the class names. But anyway, so that's one method that is, in my mind, I think anyone in the .NET community could use dispose if not null, because it's not something specific that I need. Anyone that does disposables, especially when there's multiple of them, and rather than using nested using clauses, because there's a performance issue with that, and this is minor performance issue, but nonetheless it's performance issue, plus it becomes all nested, right? It's like 2-3 levels deep, the nesting, which just makes the code look more complicated. The other method is actually, in this case, I've not made it an extension method. If you've used the db command type in ADO.NET, then a command is like the thing you use to execute stored procedures, and commands have parameters because stored procedures have parameters. So you have to add parameters to the command that mimic or are equivalent to the stored procedures commands parameters. So the names of the parameters, the type of the parameters, if there's a length limitation, then the length constraint to the parameter, and so on. The DB parameter does not have a single method in which you can set all these properties up. I'm not sure why, but every single time I use AD.NET, which is on a lot of projects, then I have to go through this thing, and it's just painful. So I have a method here that says add DB parameter, and I can give it all the arguments that I need. And one line, it adds the parameter with all the properties I'm interested in to the collection of the DB commands parameters collection here. So all this occurs with one line of code. And now in this specific case, as you can notice here, it's a method in this class. It's not an extension method. And the reason that's the case is because, and there's another like a programming with intent concept. I don't need this method anywhere else currently in this project. So it's here. I know I've made this an extension method in past projects. In this project, I don't need it to be an extension method. It's over here. I have a rule of thirds. If I need this in same thing somewhere else, and for the third time, that's when I will refactor. So I don't imagine reuse and all this sort of thing up front. I'm not interested in having a clutter of classes just because. Even though I've done this 100 times before, I know I've had the same method as an extension method in the past. In this project, it's not warranted to be an extension method because it's not used from anywhere else yet. Now, as and when this project grows and we need to use it somewhere else, then yeah, I'll change it. It'll be an extension method because then it might just go in one class. At that point, because it's going to be going in a separate class, it could be an extension method, right? But in the same vein, I've had situations where the team has decided that they didn't want this to be an extension method. Yeah, I'm cool with that. The functionality is not lost, right? So when I say I don't like extension methods, it's not like I don't want the functionality. The functionality is there, it's a variable functionality, but it doesn't have to be an extension method. What does it take to call the functionality through another static class and static method? That's what the compiler does anyway. By the time you hit compile, the compiler switched out your extension method to that anyways. That'll be another video on C# loading that I'll make hopefully the next few videos, but that's another topic as well. All right, I think I made my case. I hope I've made my case. Please don't use extension methods unless it meets that bar. Maybe you have your own bar that's even higher than the bar I've set. Go for it. If you don't agree with extension methods completely, even though you've met the bar, that's fine too. I'm cool with that. If I were to join your team or if you were to join my team and you convince me to not use extension methods, I don't have a problem. The actual extension method itself is just syntax. It's not some major calamity if you don't have it or if you don't use it. And it's cool, I get that too. I just don't want the trouble, the pains that it causes. And so I choose not to use it. And I hope you choose not to use it too. All right, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up and hit the notify thing also, because apparently unless you hit the notify thing, you don't get notified. So remember to hit the bell, whatever that bell is. And subscribe if you haven't subscribed. It's important. It'll help me and it'll give me a sense that I'm doing some good. And I will see you next time.